what you can see as you look across the agenda over the 3 days is the diverse range of contributions, but most importantly for me, it reflects a set of perspectives, but also a reality of where education is right now. And that challenge, and it's more than a challenge, of what we as leaders in education face. And I think we are in a very pivotal moment. And there are times when I see it as a privilege, you know, to almost be at that point. Think of yourself as somebody climbing a mountain, and I'm not a mountain climber, quite literally, but it is that pivotal moment of where you get to that bit of the mountain and you're not quite sure whether you're going to be able to go any further. But you look around you, you get that opportunity to have a glimpse at the landscape. And there's something that's actually physically quite breathtaking. And I think for me as a leader, we're in that moment right now because we are faced by potentially a changing government. We're faced by some of the prescribed approaches to education that we see. We're challenged by that, and it's almost like somebody defining a pathway for us. But we each want to bring to that our autonomy, and we each want to navigate how we get onto the next step, how we get onto that next ledge to be able to look at the landscape. And what this conference is about is how we navigate, for me, how we navigate across the different phases, across the different disciplines, and across the different aspects of leadership. And what I could also see alongside that were those moments of climbing the mountain, and I'm sure leaders across the room in whatever role you're in, and some people say, well, I'm not a leader, and they say, I'm just in the classroom. And that's one of those things that I almost put my fingers in my ears as I hear people say it. You are never just in the classroom, you are a leader of the classroom, and that's imperative. But there are those moments when, as leaders, there is an isolation and people can feel like, is anyone out there? You know, can anybody see me here where I am? Or is this something that I'm on my own with? And at that moment, I think for me, it's not isolation. It's about how can we collaborate. There are also those moments when we have demands placed upon us from every which direction, and we can feel like the pressure is, well, who is helping me with that? And the answer, the solution at that moment is collaboration. And I think there are also those moments when we question our commitment and we question our journey in terms of, can we continue with the pathway that we're working with? And for me, again, the answer at that moment is collaboration. Because as leaders, when we are faced with isolation, the pressure that's on us, and the commitments that we have and want to achieve, we have to think about who we can work with, who we can learn from, and who will challenge us. And it's that challenge that helps us to navigate and to determine what the next landscapes can look like. And we have a duty, we have a role as leaders and as professionals within education to be part of it's a privilege to be part of that next landscape. If we think back over our careers, if I think back over my career and think, would I be sitting in, 25 years' time on a Zoom call, working with people, looking at leadership? The answer to that would have been no, all those years ago. But we have a duty to then determine how we can collaborate and how we can take our leadership forward. So I'm looking forward to hearing from our speakers tonight. I know that we're going to hear from Deb to begin with, Deb Outhwaite, and I know that she's going to share her work, and then we'll work our way through the agenda.
So I was talking to Lizana about what I wanted to talk about, and it seems to me that students and people who are interested in education and education leadership often say to people like me and Lizana, well, how do you know about that? How did you get involved in that? So what I wanted to talk to you today was about leadership through networking. And I've been thinking a lot about agency, but also, as you'll see in a minute, autonomy, just as Diana's been mentioning. So I wanted us to talk about how we gain agency in our really highly fragmented landscape. So that's the theme. And really what I want to do is talk you through the different options and different opportunities that there are to support your learning. So I want to bring you all together. I want you to have a good twilight this evening, but also for the next 2 evenings. But I want to talk about the system that we all work in and talk about what we can do to make things better. Diana's just mentioned that we're standing on the verge of, a new beginning. And I think a lot of us want to see some change and want to see some difference. But what I critically want to do is to share some of those sources that are out there on leadership and help you in your own leadership journeys, whether that's as a practitioner in a school or a college, or as a researcher, or if you're somebody who's just dipping your toe into the research, just having a think about how you can move forward with that research. So people often say to me, oh, I don't know how you fit it all in, or I don't know, how you're involved in that and that. And I really thought long and hard about this, because I do say no to things. But it seems to me that actually the networks that we choose to be in are the networks that we choose to support us. They're the networks that support us and the daily challenges that we all face. And I think that's a really important thing. So I'm going to talk a bit about those different organisations that are there for that support and that collaboration and that partnership, and talk about the opportunities for research and publications and some of the international networking as part of that. I know this isn't an IPDA event, it's a University of Wolverhampton event, but I put quite a lot about IPDA in my bio that you might have seen on the nice flyer that Lizana put together. And that's because when I think of the University of Wolverhampton, largely I think because of Linda Devlin, before Lizana joined Wolverhampton, it's sort of inextricably linked along with BCU with IPDA in my mind. And actually IPDA is a very good organisation, learned society, again, 50-year-old learned society, as a lot of them are now, that's a nice space to dip your toe in when you're doing that sort of research. I did my first presentation at IPDA in 2008, and I'd just gone into higher education full-time, hadn't left a school post, and it was small, friendly, comfortable, international, and very local to us in the West Midlands, usually held at Aston University. So if you're thinking about somewhere where you can go and meet people and present, you've got 2 good journals there with professional development in education and the practice journal. You've got chapters from various places around the world, including IPDA England, a friendly conference, and online working spaces that they've created as well. So if you haven't come across that, that's one of the first ones that I wanted to give a kind of shout out for this evening. Now, before I go through my slides, I want to give you an opportunity to actually have an influence yourselves. I've been part of a large collaboration of stakeholders who've come together to survey teachers and to get teachers and researchers' views. And I'm going to put a QR code and a short URL on the next slide. So if you want to get your cameras out from your smartphones and get ready to scan the QR code or a pen and paper out to type out the short URL link, you can follow the QR code, and then while I'm talking you can complete the survey questions, and the most important ones that we really want answers to you'll see around question 6. These views are being fed back to help inform policy, the most critical policy of which is that an incoming new government isn't going to have any money. So what we were doing was canvassing opinion across education, and we talked to some people slightly outside education as well, particularly interested in people in prisons and social workers and allied areas to the welfare state, which I'm going to talk a bit more about later. But the most important ones are there around question 6 in order to help inform policy, and I'll come back to it at the end. So here is the slide with the QR code, and if that doesn't work for you, then there's the short link there that you can just type in. So I'll just leave that on the screen for a moment or two while you scan it, and then you can take part in a survey that's helping inform the landscape and the changes that perhaps we all think we need to make at this point in, as Diana was mentioning, the electoral cycle. Before we move on, I have to say that about 10 days ago, I read an article in The Guardian by George Monbiot that completely changed the nature of the talk I was going to give you tonight. I was going to talk about a particular research project where we've come together, and I decided that actually what George Monbiot was writing about was so important that we needed to talk about that instead. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to have a look at that, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Most of the conversations I'm talking about here tonight are from a book that Catherine and Simon and I put together last summer, that was published last summer. And in broadly speaking, this is around the system. So it's around schools and school groupings, however we choose to define local areas, the system as a whole, and how the DfE increasingly narrowly define particularly system leadership. So what we're really talking about is individual versus collective agency and the way in which we move through our roles as leaders in education. And this particular book is aimed at undergraduates, so people who are interested in education, but it was also written with a view to informing people who are on national professional qualifications. So if you've trained to teach chemistry, for example, a lot of education policy and the changes in education, particularly at the start of your career, are going to be very new to you. So that was the idea, and a lot of the themes come from that. So I'm going to be giving shout outs to various organisations, having just mentioned IPDA. And the first one I wanted to mention is British Educational Studies Association, which has just renamed itself as the International Education Studies Association. So again, the web link for this is here. And the reason I think they deserve a shout out is because they're one of the few organisations across the sector who have a publication for academics, as a lot of our organisations do, and you'll see that this evening, but rather critically, they have this publication called Transformations, which publishes undergraduate research. And what I was thinking about is the journey of people dipping their feet into the world of academia. A lot of people do that really for the first time in education when they're doing their masters. And yet when I talk to people, a lot of them have got education related qualifications earlier on. And what Transformations is doing is enabling people to start what we would call their biographical trajectories that much earlier. So I think this is a really good publication for you to have a think about. And if you're working on an education studies programme or an MA education programme, it's a really ideal space to have student research published. Okay, so my background is in social sciences, and I use Margaret Archer's work all the time, and she talks about education structures and agency. And I have been thinking about whether or not our agency is automatically a good thing. So I work across lots of the head teachers. I provide leadership preparation and development for head teachers. I provide a lot of professional development that I facilitate, but also that I teach myself. And a lot of my heads that I work with talk about not being able to radically alter the conditions or the structures that they have. And so the more they learn, actually, the more frustrated they can be about the fact that they can change very little. And so I've always thought, you know, coming from a bit more of an academic background, that the more you learn, the more agency you have, because the more understanding you have that goes with that. But actually, really, we're in this position 14 years into austerity now, where people are developing their agency and they can feel quite frustrated in that. So whether or not we mean agency or whether or not we mean autonomy, which is what Diana was just mentioning, so that leaders can choose to lead in the way they want to lead, despite the constraints that are on them. You know, now we know all our constraints are, you know, not great, but actually we're always going to be constrained in one way or another. You know, new government coming in, as I've already mentioned, and the survey that you'll be working your way through now has very little funding to move forward with. So changing government is not the answer. The answer is in the way in which we choose to work together. So that kind of brings me back to the George Monbiot article I was reading about. And the theme of the article was around our mental health being poor and our society spiraling backwards. And George Monbiot has just written this new book, just published a new book. It was out this week, called The Invisible Doctrine, which is all about the impact, the pervasive impact of neoliberalism in our system. And I think one of the things about this is that neoliberalism is something that we always talk about, but we perhaps don't see the impact of neoliberalism in our world. We think, oh yes, that's the system that it's run, but we don't perhaps make the links between it. And so George Monbiot's article came with this picture. And I thought, how amazing to link all of those different areas together through that neoliberal ideology. And his theme for his article was this 4th annual Mental State of the World report. And I'll send Lizanna my slides, so if you want the links, you can have them afterwards. And we are one from the bottom on that table that's been constructed. So we are just above Uzbekistan. So every other country in the world that's taken part in that is above us. And one of the things that is really consuming head teachers and leaders in schools at the moment is our social and emotional and mental health, and it's our attendance rates. So we're currently running at about a 23% absence rate across the system at the moment. And you can imagine, for those of us who work in the field, that that has huge implications. It has implications for now, just like COVID did, but it has implications for later. It has huge, you know, I don't need to spell them out. You're all interested in education. That's why you're here. But it has huge social implications as we move forward. So I wanted you really to be aware of that link. And there are lots of great people doing work on this at the moment, but one person I would give a shout out to is Ellie Costello at Square Peg. So if you're interested in attendance, why children aren't in school, the different challenges around why children aren't in school and the issues that leaders are having to deal with, have a look at the Team Square Peg website. It's really, really worth reading. And as you can see, their catch phrase here is being about fighting for an education that doesn't expect those square pegs to fit into a round hole. Ellie has been coming for the last 3 years now to speak to the PGCE students that I train, and every year she leaves them in a much better position for having spent the time speaking to them. So there's a lot of, you know, really good stuff going on there, with a huge backdrop that's incredibly challenging, not least the lag that we have in our SEND funding, and the huge rise that we've had in our SEND funding. So back to that George Monbiot article that I was telling you about. What George Monbiot was making were the links from Beveridge's 5 Giants. Now, if you're not familiar with Beveridge's 5 Giants, they are the things that created our welfare state. So William Beveridge published a report in 1942. We had what we called a coalition government in the Second World War. So that's where you have both parties in power together. And those parties in power together chose to move forward effectively together. So Beveridge identified these 5 areas of life in the Second World War that were issues for the British state, that the British state needed to deal with. And those of you who are familiar with this will be very well aware that want created our social security system to try and deal with our poverty. Disease famously created our National Health Service in 1948. And if you haven't had a chance to see Nye, which is on at the National Theatre, it's being live screened to cinemas across the country. Really great production if you want to see and understand some of the challenges that were up against that Labour government in the 1940s in creating the NHS. Ignorance in the 1940s was allegedly solved by our 1944 Education Act, and squalor was solved with our council housing that was massively built in the 50s and 60s, in England particularly, and idleness was solved with right to work programmes and getting people to work in the welfare state that was set up through the 40s. Giving people jobs when they came back from the war to build houses, to work and to train in various professions that expanded massively. And what George Monbiot was doing was he was linking those 5 giants to today and saying, we've been through this welfare state that gave us the answers, that thought we were going to be, gave us the leadership to think that we were going to be in a society that carried on getting better. And one of the things that's been really chronic in terms of the leadership in the last decade or so is that things have been getting worse and worse. And so we've had increased poverty. We've had, and you can see, the UNICEF, for example, published a report on children's poverty recently. We've had morbidity with increasing rates of, or decreasing life expectancy rates. So our comorbidities, where you have co-conditions that increase morbidity rates, are substantially greater now than they have been before. We have, having created our education system has become incredibly fragmented now, and our educational exclusion rates are high. Also, of course, our current absence rates that I was just talking about are the thing that really worrying us. And then on top of that, with council housing that was famously sold off in the 1980s, we've got this wretched housing and crumbling infrastructure. And if you add into that RAC and the issues that hospitals, prisons, schools have with that crumbling infrastructure, we can see that that's a real problem for us as a UK economy. And then we've gone from idleness having been solved and work having been created through to now the inability work. And that's a real significant issue. But what I think is really significant in that is the intersectionality that comes with it. So we have a multifaceted nature now of poverty and deprivation. And I just put one of the LSE papers up here. If you haven't seen the impact of this, have a look at it. So in 2017, the government passed a bill through Parliament to punish effectively families who have more than 2 children. And that's the greatest reason, according to this research, that more children now live in poverty in England than ever before. And it's also very countercultural. It's not the same sort of leadership that we've experienced anywhere else. So there are only a couple of other countries who have limits on the number of children. And actually those countries have limits of 3 or 4 children. So Spain has one of those, but it has it at 4 children, not 2 like this. So, there are really significant social policy decisions that are being taken on a national stage, a leadership stage, that are resulting in significant impact in our classrooms that our teachers and our leaders in schools are then having to pick up. So that reminded me of the Wendy Brown quote that we used in the book that I was just talking about. And I'll just give you a minute to read this quote. This is Wendy Brown defining the paradox of neoliberalism. So you can see from that quote that what we're doing is going through a period of deregulation, but also what I would refer to as re-regulation. And we have control that goes through as part of that. And that's a significant issue for us in education. So a lot of my own research has been about gender and educational leadership. And we always stand on the shoulders of the giants who go before us. So Valerie Hall's very famous work, tracking down the invisible issue of women as leaders and changing the ways in which we research gender and leadership and think about those intersectionalities and social pressures that women have as leaders, through to Marianne Coleman's work on head teachers and the role that has gone on there. And that led me, when I was just finishing off my own doctorate, into Women Ed that was set up at about that time. And Women Ed are, again, one of those other organisations that you can get involved in with these 4 campaigns that they run. So you can see the titles of the 4 campaigns there. And again, you can see the intersectionality across those different roles. And you can see the intersectionality there across the welfare state as well. So think about things like WASPE, for example, that you will have heard about. So the Women Against State Pensions, women who were told at 67 that they weren't, or told in their mid-60s that they weren't getting their pension that they were expecting until that age. So Women Ed events are usually free events. They're leadership networking events. They're aiming to help career progression. And the hashtag he for she means that they are not all female events. We very much welcome men who are on that platform who want to help promote women. And we have one, for those of you who are in the Midlands physically, we have one at Trent College in Long Eaton on the Derbyshire-Nottinghamshire border, the East Midlands one, on Saturday, June the 8th. And I think V. Gandhi has just joined us, actually. She's talking in a couple of days' time. She's the one who's organising that. So hello, V. So that gender and education leadership research then goes on into Megan Crawford's work. If you haven't read this book, it's definitely one to have a read of, about the role of emotion in leadership and the amount of motion work that goes on in leading in schools and in female leading. And Kay Fuller published her book in 2017, updating and continuing the role of Marianne Coleman's work and thinking about the number of heads that are female. Though that number has gone up in the last few years, actually, as Schools Week has shown, it's not increasing amongst the roles of MAT CEOs. So MAT CEOs are just at 30%, which is what the secondary school heads used to be about a decade or so ago. So again, you can see those definite kind of intersections. So that work brought me into Belmas. And it brought me into Belmas because I went to an event that Jill Berry was also present at, and Tony Bush was saying that somebody needed to do some work in leadership preparation and development. So I helped to co-convene a RIG. Research interest groups, for those of you who are doing masters or doing doctorates, research interest groups are great events where you get access to the research and the researchers, and you get the opportunity to join in those discussions. And you can see here that, as with a lot of the other learned societies that I've shown you this evening, we publish a couple of journals, but it was the strap line that meant the most sense to me. So where practice meets research. And I thought, okay, being in this leadership space, that felt like the right space for me. It showed that this is, where the people were who were interested in educational leadership, but also interested in the role of education leaders and the different ways and levels, as Diana was pointing out in her introduction to us, that people can join. So a lot of my background has been in school and HE partnerships over about the last 15 years. And I'm interested in how a lot of you on today's session will be developing your own biographical narratives by engaging in higher education. So what you will be doing is developing an area of research that's interesting to you and developing your biographical trajectory at the same time as that. And I think this quote from Helen Gunter and Steve Courtney from a paper in Management and Education a couple of years ago about the research that we can do in education, in an education space, is actually a critical one. So I'll just give you a minute to read that. So my interest in school and HE partnerships is that I've worked with lots of school cohorts to develop those partnerships. I've had a lot of management and leadership and management cohorts that I've run, but also I've run teaching and learning cohorts, and I've run cohorts across MATs as well. And I've supervised a lot of master's leadership programs and done a lot of individual supervision. I now supervise their Ds with global leaders in a centre for higher education studies. But what we find when people are researching the area that they are choosing to work in is that they're developing their practice all the time in that work. And what we find with school and HE partnerships, as that quote I just put up here again, shows that those field resources are plural. There are lots of different ways in which you can research your own practice. So you're looking at how you relate to one another, you're thinking about the background in your research, and you're thinking then about how you learn in that process, but actually also often lots of other people are learning alongside and with you in that. So we've got lots of different learning processes that are going on as part of that. One of the critical ways that people have come into higher education, leadership and learning education programs in the last few years has been through mentoring and coaching. So people will come in supervising big initial teachers, for example, people who are training in their classrooms with local, often teaching universities. And there are lots of areas out there that support this specific mentoring and coaching. In fact, Zana's also not long published a book on the topic too. So you've got the Chartered College of Teaching. The Chartered College of Teaching has produced great resources for beginner teachers, but also for early career frameworks, great early career framework handbook. You've got BERA doing general educational research, helping sustain you in your role with different blogs and podcasts about all sorts of different areas, but also Collective Ed and the work that Rachel Lofthouse has done at Leeds Beckett, providing a really fabulous community for people who mentor. So there's lots of, and coach. So there's lots and lots and lots of links and support and sustainable areas there for when people find those additional roles just a bit much, or just finding their way in them that are actually really useful to people in those roles that they're doing. Now, Rachel Lofthouse has been doing some work with Viv Ellis and a number of others looking at crisis. And teacher education has been going through a crisis. You know, we've had lots of crises, haven't we? We know our state is covered in them, really. I've just mentioned WASPs, but we've had a range of different scandals. See the blood scandals back in the press at the moment. And obviously before that, we had Windrush. So we've got one after the other in terms of those collections. But actually what this book does is really well explain the crisis that teacher education has been in, and of course has that neoliberal theme that I was talking about at the beginning. So we understand that precarity has been associated with higher education, particularly since the start of austerity. I mean, it might have been there slightly before, but perhaps not in quite the same way that it is now. I did a talk earlier on today with somebody who works for the NHS Confederation. He has a strategic role looking at the join up and the way in which we join up. And he was saying, is every region prepared to lose one of their universities? Because the universities are currently broke and we have too many of them, and two of them across every region will be knocked out. So you can see that we've moved to the creation of these for-profit institutions, you know, Student Finance England, reliance that we've had on international students, changes to contracts, and you can see the terms and conditions of university staff have changed and you know, really become quite significantly different to those in TPS, teachers' pension. So some redundancies around teacher education were announced in part before COVID because of the restructure that's coming down the line. It comes into effect this September, but some have been in part post-COVID in terms of the way things have been changed. But really what we're talking about, as the Viv Ellis book talks about, is the deprofessionalisation of teaching at all levels, from all levels. And it's that all levels and being in a system that's under challenge that makes me think, right, so which communities do you choose to spend your time with to have that energy given back to you in order to be able to contribute? So we've got issues, as we know, with recruitment and retention. I've listed out some of them there, but really what we're talking about is a system that's being redesigned to have cheap, regularly replaceable, non-unionised throughput rather than a group of expert professionals that input into system redevelopment. And it's that change in structure, you know, that changes massively the way in which we lead, because it means we're starting to work with very different sorts of people. One of the things that's happened just in the 6 years since I've been running what was a teaching school is that a lot of that expertise has retired. And in the past, we'd have expected head teachers to retire and be engaged in local authority school improvement work, or to, you know, be involved in specific local projects. But actually what's happening is people are saying, no, I've had enough. Kay Fuller published a great paper called Red Lines in 2019 about how close heads were getting to where their red lines were. I've put a link in here to an art design link from Access Art. This is a really good blog that explains the issues with Oak. So if you're not familiar with the issues with Oak, it really is worth understanding the system that the government have created. So the impact of this on teacher leadership gives us a lack of specialism. It means that people are taught to focus on the how rather than why. They're not taught about what we're doing things for. It comes with a very limited framework of research support, and the leadership gets drawn from smaller and smaller pools, and then we have decreasing opportunities for that autonomy and for that vision. And that's an ongoing issue for us in education, because as Diana just mentioned, you have different types of schools, and that's fine as long as you get that choice. But often there are areas now where they haven't got that choice. So there are, you know, things that problems that are kind of rolling out with that. And some of those we're not even aware of the full extent of them yet. I was talking to Andy Wilkins earlier on today. Some of you may be aware of him. So he does work around governance about the impact of AI and the role that AI now plays already in school improvement work. And you know, there are lots on the radar from this that still has yet to play out. So I was talking earlier on about intersectionalism. So intersectionalism is around the Institute of Education and Social Equity. And this is another one of the organisations that I've got involved in, because it's really useful to have that sectional understanding that improves practice and outcomes. So it's very much focusing on people in practice, people in leadership roles, but very much looking at race as the first issue of that intersectionality. So I'm just putting that on your radar in case you haven't come across them before. So we understand that it's relatively easy to re-professionalise our sector, but actually what we can see is that we've had a deprofessionalisation of it. We've got a very female heavy, and always have done, of course, workforce in education. But the more female heavy that is, it recreates and reinforces the perception that teaching and caring for young children is women's work. And it reduces that battle, really, that we've talked about before in terms of those women-led campaigns, the equal pay battle. So I mentioned earlier on about that trust CEOs number. We're not seeing an increase to that, so it'll be interesting to see how that changes. Bursaries, of course, have changed, and bursaries have changed not just in education. You know, I've made the comparison here to nursing, you know, and there are lots of issues with that. So in education, our practitioner research is very different to the medicine, the engineering, computing, the other fields. And actually, one of the things we need to think about is what we can learn from elsewhere and why we've allowed it to become so different. And there are lots and lots of things you can read that show that actually more significant the professions are, the more research they do, and there, of course, the more autonomy they have. Some of you will have been watching that, of course, with the way the junior doctors' strike has been playing out and the change of the rhetoric around that. So I'm just going to finish by talking about a couple of organisations. One is the RSA. The RSA challenges that society at present isn't acceptable. We're not happy with it. We have ways of changing it and dealing with it in a way that we want to move forward that are better and more positive and more upbeat. And that connects really the history of design, having an ability to change about the way we think, but also think about sustainability and the ways in which we live. And so one of the organisations I've been doing some work with recently is a climate change organisation that spends time, it puts designers into primary classrooms and it gets designers to spend time with children. And over that half a term, children, teachers and designers imagine a different future and develop creative designs that address the climate crisis. So I went into a school recently where they had grown algae and then the algae had been made into clothing. Okay, so really helping children to engage in difference and moving forwards. So there are lots of sources of education leadership and education information that can enable you to navigate what I think is a complex, fragmented and challenging landscape to lead in. I've put up the details here of the new Edu Hub that was launched today. Actually, I was in the first session at 2 o'clock this afternoon, and we had a session on crises, educational crises. So do join that if you want to. It's another source of useful information for you, particularly if you're studying at the moment. And I've mentioned the invisible doctrine, I mentioned that right at the beginning, but here are some of the other areas that you may want to take a quick photo of or have a look at in terms of things that really kind of helping illuminate the challenges that we as leaders in education have at the moment. They're definitely what I would consider worthwhile thing to read over the summer. So I hope that's given you time to answer the survey and to feel that your views will be listened to. I'm happy to talk about some of this after. I've got references up there, but I'm going to hand over to Jill now, if Diana wants to do the screen share for that, and then we'll probably come back to questions afterwards.
We will come to questions after Jill, but I do want to say thank you because I think what you've given us, and I hadn't seen your slides before, but you have very helpfully taken me helped me to have some moments to reflect there over some of the landscapes that I very definitely feel that I'm part of, and I'm sure that you've done that for our audience this evening too. So that will give time for people to think of questions, and I've certainly got a couple that are on my paper ready, but let us pass to Jill and then we'll come to questions afterwards.
So thank you very much. Thank you, Deb. Thank you, Diana. So I'm speaking in the next section of the evening about this, the relationship between leadership and learning, telling you something about my own leadership and learning journey, but also encouraging you to think about yours. But I'm going to start by sharing a couple of slides which give you a bit of background to me. So I'm very aware that some of you won't know me at all. So I started teaching in 1980, and over the next 30 years, I taught in 6 different schools, and they were quite different schools, so state and independent. And I also taught adults at night school for a while, different gender groups, selective, comprehensive, different age ranges. I was the deputy of a 4 to 18 school. I was the head of the 7 to 18 school, and I taught in 11 to 18 schools too. And I loved being in a school with its own primary section. I felt I learned a lot from primary colleagues. I think the skill you need to teach early years is far greater than the skill you need to teach A-level personally. So I have huge admiration for people who teach our youngest children. But I am actually a secondary specialist. I started life as a senior school English teacher in a mixed comprehensive in the Northwest back in 1980. I was head of English in due course, I was head of sixth form for a while. I became deputy head in Nottingham, in the Nottingham Girls High School, if you know that, it's a Girls' Day School Trust School. And then I became head of a school in Bedford. Now, I'm going to ask you this evening just to jot down your thoughts and put some of them in the chat. So the first thing I want you to write down, so on paper and pen, or if you have another device on which you're making notes. When I was interviewed for my headship, it was in 1999 to start in 2000. One of the questions I was asked at interview was, we intend to appoint today. If we appoint you, how long do you think you will be here for and why? And I thought that was a really interesting question and not a question I'd come across before. So I just want you to jot that question down for yourself, just to give it some thought. So you go for an interview for a role, whatever that might be. And at the end, they say, if we appoint you today, how long will you commit to this job in this place for and why? And it's the why, I think, that's the really important part of that question. So just write down the question and just have a think about what you might say if you went for an interview for a job you really wanted and they asked you about your anticipated commitment. It's an interesting question, I think. Just give you a few seconds to think about it. I don't think there's a right answer to that question, and you don't know what it is they're hoping to hear, really, whether they want someone who's going to be very dynamic, not there for that long necessarily, but a bit of a whirlwind while they're there, or whether they want stability and security and steadiness, you don't know. But I think there are two things that make for a compelling answer to that question. And my advice is that, first of all, whatever you say needs to be true. It needs to be how you feel. It needs to be what you think about your next steps. And if it seems odd to say, tell the truth at interview, I have to say it's easy to fall into the trap, if you really want a job, of trying to second guess what the panel want to hear and then supplying it. And you can find yourself saying what you think is the right answer. In actual fact, it may not be what you really think and feel. And if that happens, you need to stop yourself, because not getting a job is not the worst thing that could happen to you. But getting the wrong job definitely could be. You could be quite unhappy and probably not very successful. So number one, whatever you say, make sure it's how you really do feel and what you think at that point. But secondly, I think you need to be able to see that question from their perspective as well as your own. And that isn't the same as telling them what they want to hear. It just means that you're aware of their particular point of view. So they are investing quite a lot in this process as well. So when you apply for a job, I know we tend to be thinking in terms of what we will gain, how we will benefit. And that's reasonable, that's natural, it's normal. But they're particularly interested in what we will give, what we will bring, what we will contribute, what we will add. So I think your answer to that question needs to take that into account as well. And those are good words to use in an interview or in an application. This is what I can offer. This is what I will bring. So it's just something to think about, because I hadn't thought about it. And I found myself saying 10 years. It seemed to me that for a headship, 10 years might be a good block of time to invest in a school. It was a 7 to 18 school, so it was an 11-year journey of a pupil from year 3 through to the upper 6 if they stayed all the way through. So 10 years was almost the cycle of a pupil through the school. And interestingly, all my predecessors, I found subsequently, had stayed at least 10 years. So it seemed to be the right answer for me, and I explained why I thought years would give me time to embed and introduce things and work with the governors and make the school even stronger than I found it and leave something for my successor to build on. And for me, it was the right answer. So after 10 years of headship, I stepped back, and I'll just show you the kinds of things I've been doing since then. I'll let you read this slide because it's quite text heavy. So in the past 14 years, I have been involved in education, and particularly in things to do with educational leadership. And that's what I'm talking about tonight. So I did a doctorate at Nottingham, where I looked at the transition between deputy headship and headship. I work as a consultant, and everything I do is related to leadership training, aspiring leaders, serving leaders. I spend a lot of time on Twitter, or X, about education, connecting with educators. I'm very keen on connections and network and collaboration, as Deb knows. I blog about education, and I use LinkedIn as well for professional purposes. So it's all to do with educational professional development. I run a course, an online course with a retired head about specifically leading within the independent sector, because there didn't seem to be anything else about that out there. And it's, for some of us, it's something that we would consider. And I wrote a book, Making the Leap, Moving from Deputy to Head, which is based on my doctorate, but it's very much for a professional audience rather than an academic audience. And although it is about moving to headship, in a way, it's just about making any leadership transition. I also started writing fiction in 2019. I've published 3 short novels. I'm giving you the link just in case you're a reader of literary fiction and you're interested in having a look. And I'm just about to bring out a 4th novel, which is actually set in the pandemic, about a family of 4 navigating COVID in the UK over 18 months. And the novel's called 18 Months. So those are just some of the things that I've done since I stepped back from headship. And as I say, leadership is what I'm particularly interested in. Leadership is what I'm committed to. I think it is so important at all levels. And if we get leadership right, we make schools stronger. And if we don't have committed, dedicated leadership, then the organisations that we're part of inevitably will be weaker as a result. So I want to go now to the chat stream, and I put in leadership is ... What I want you to do is just think about this, jot a few ideas down in your own notes first. But then when you're ready, can you put into the chat stream what you think is really important about leadership? What is leadership about, all for you? And have a look at what your fellow participants think. Thank you. Thanks, Anika. Lots of interesting observations. Lots of consistency. Yeah. Looking after yourself so that you can look after others, Angie. Absolutely. I want to move on and just share a few thoughts about leadership from other people, see whether they connect, whether they align and resonate with your own views, or see whether it's offering different perspectives. This is the first one. It's a very good book called The Unexpected Leader by Aisha Small. She talks quite a lot in it about what can happen when you are catapulted into a leadership position that you weren't necessarily expecting. And she has a lovely phrase about you can find yourself with big shoes to fill and you didn't even realise you were going to try them on. So I've never been in that position. The leadership roles I've had, I've always gone for. But I know it can happen. Sometimes circumstances just mean that you find yourself leading, not reluctantly necessarily, but unexpectedly. Aisha is also very, very good on introvert leadership and what strong leaders, strong, thoughtful, considered leaders, introverts can be. In a world and education, the world of education, I think, is quite geared up to catering for the extrovert. So it's a good book, The Unexpected Leader. I've given you the link. And this is what Aisha says. Sometimes people think that leadership is about titles, head of this, director of that. In those roles, you're certainly paid to have influence, but true influence is about whose behaviour you can affect, not just what a plaque on an office door says. So it's not about a title. It's certainly not about status. It's about influence, and hopefully positive influence. Whose behaviour do you affect? And how can you make sure that that effect is as constructive, as supportive, as positive, as empowering as possible? And when you move through the leadership levels, your sphere of influence, your sphere of professional influence changes. It expands, it can intensify and deepen. And wanting to do that, wanting to increase your sphere of professional influence, I think is a very good reason for moving to a new role. So that was Aisha's view. And then I came across this, Cory Booker, who at the time was a US senator, actually when Trump was in the White House, which I always thought must have been interesting for Cory. Cory said leadership is not a position or a title, it is action an example. So it aligns with Aisha's view, action and example. What you say, what you model, what ideas you promote through your leadership role. If people ask me about my definition of leadership, I tend to say something like this. I'll just give you a chance to read it. And I think it aligns with what some of you have said about support, about teamwork, about facilitating, and actually helping others to achieve more, rather than just thinking about what you can do. How can you support and challenge others to achieve and to be their personal and professional best? And if I'm asked about, well, how do we do that? If that's what leadership is, how do we ensure we're successful? I tend to think about these three things: about how important strong communication is, about how important relationships are, making sure that they're positive, they're mutually respectful. But it's also about what you do, and sometimes what you choose not to do. And the action you take as a leader ideally needs to be based on sound judgment. And the judgment needs to be based on knowledge. And that's knowledge of your domain, your context, and particularly of the people you're leading. So to me, leadership is all about that. And I'm thinking tonight about the relationship between leadership and learning. So I was thinking, well, if that's what leadership is, what is learning all about in its widest sense? Now, I don't want you to put this in the chat necessarily, but can you just give yourself a few seconds to think, how would you define learning? What do you think learning is all about? And when I thought about this, particularly in the context of this presentation, looking at leadership and learning, I decided that learning was particularly about growth. So Diana, that was something that you said that really struck a chord with me. Learning is about growth. And if you move into a leadership role, you are constantly growing, you are constantly learning. And although you can prepare for a leadership role in advance, ultimately, you learn how to lead from leading. And Robert Quinn in 2004 said this, that leaders in a new role have to build the bridge as they walk on it. You cannot make sure the bridge is fully constructed before you even apply. You have to do the job in order to continue your learning about how to do the job. And sometimes that means making mistakes, reflecting, evaluating, learning from them, doing things slightly differently in the light of your experience. Sometimes it means that it's only when you do something and get it right that you realize how important it is and you know you need to do more of it. So build the bridge as you walk on it as a leader, I think, is important. But again, this is something Diana said at the beginning, which really resonated for me. It isn't about a position, a title, status, power, because from the first day you enter a classroom, you are leading learning. And I want you to think about this. As a teacher, without any specific responsibility for leading your colleagues or your peers, you're still using leadership behaviours. So as a teacher at any level, primary, secondary, further education, higher education, whatever it might be, think where you are using leadership behaviours. You are forming and strengthening your capacity to lead, even if you're not actually a middle leader, a senior leader, a head, a principal, whatever it might be. So what leadership behaviours would you say teachers adopt and develop as they are leading learning in their classroom, even without formal leadership responsibility for the adults around them? In your own notes, can you just jot down a few of your thoughts about that? Leadership behaviours that you develop as a classroom teacher or a lecturer. And when you've marshalled your thoughts, can you put some of them in the chat? So what leadership behaviours do you use as a teacher of pupils or students? Thank you, Deb. So role modeling is really important. What else? Thanks, Diana. Yeah. Honesty and kindness are crucial in leaders. Supporting, depending on their needs, yeah, knowing what their needs are. Equality, listening, thank you, Bagya. Making decisions, knowing the learners, and then acting accordingly. And every learner may need something different, just as everyone that you lead may need different things from you. Being curious, making links. Yeah, we're preparing them from a world that none of us can really anticipate. Thanks, Deb. Relationships again. And as you develop their strengths and abilities, you are also honing your own, working towards inclusion, diversity, equity. Thanks, Fee. Scroll back up the thread and have a look at what other people have had to suggest and see what you'd like to add to that. Thanks, Chantal. High expectations, leading by example, all really important. Thank you, Maria. Yep, goals again. Showing understanding, knowing them well, empathy, creating strong bonds, encouraging. Brilliant, thank you. Anything more from anyone else? So carry on typing if you're typing. I want to know what you think. But when I was preparing this, I just thought about, what do I think? What would I say are key leadership behaviours that we develop in the classroom? And I came up with these. So teachers leading learning in their classrooms, we're lifting. We need to lift, not grind down. We need to make the learners feel better about their capacity to step up and be more and achieve more and be proud of what they're achieving. And we motivate, we inspire, we persuade, we model, that's been mentioned, we negotiate, we scaffold, we have to explain, support, encourage, but also challenge, constructively challenge. We have to hold those learners to account. So all the time we are teaching and developing these skills, we are strengthening our own leadership capacity. And even if we decide we never want a formal leadership role where we lead our colleagues, nevertheless, we are leaders. And it's really important that we don't say, I don't want to be a leader, I'm a teacher. As Diana said at the beginning, all teachers are leaders, and we need to give ourselves credit for that. So I came back to this. To be a successful teacher, we need to get communication right, we need to get relationships right, and we need to take appropriate action, which is based on judgment. And again, the knowledge of our domain, our subject, our area, whatever it is we're teaching, our context, so where we're teaching, when we're teaching, how our context affects how we teach, and particularly of people, those we teach, we need to know them. So it seemed to me that the relationship between leadership and learning is quite symbiotic, really. It's very closely connected. In the process of teaching, we are as leaders, we're learning and we are growing. So my next question, the next thing I want you to think about and put something eventually in the chat is this. If you currently have a leadership role, what are the most important things you think you've learned in your leadership? What have you learned about yourself? What have you learned about others? What have you learned about what makes leadership effective? If you don't have a formal leadership role, think what you've learned from leading learning in the classroom. So just jot down a few notes for yourselves. What have you learned about leadership from your own experiences? I'm sure you've learned a lot. So try and work out what are the most important lessons you've learned. So what I want to do just in the last part of this session is to just share with you some of the things I thought about as I was preparing this. What have I learned on my own leadership journey? And I came up with 5 things that I think are particularly important. And in each case, there's a reference to something just to share my thoughts maybe a little more fully. But these were the 5 things that I came up with. You need to try to be the leader that you would have wanted. We learn a lot from the positive leader role models we meet in our careers. We learn perhaps even more from the negative role models. So every time you feel, oh, I wouldn't have done that, I wouldn't have said that, I wouldn't have treated her that way, you are actually strengthening your vision of the leader you want to be, the leader you could be. But it's really important that the negative leaders don't put us off. Well, I wouldn't want to be head because look what happens to you. It wouldn't happen to you. You would be at the head that's true to who you are, but you will have learnt from both positive and negative role models along the way. So there's a link to a blog I wrote about learning from positive and negative leadership role models, if that's of any interest to you. Secondly, I thought about this. It is about seeing the best in people. You can only get the best from people if you can see what that is, if they see that you see it. When people are resistant, I don't like to talk about difficult people and difficult conversations. We're all fighting our own battles. Sometimes there are challenging conversations. But often when we meet some kind of resistance, it's underpinned by fear. At some level, they are scared. They're scared that perhaps they can't do whatever it is that you are asking from them. And this is true of pupils just as it is of adults. And we have to understand that, and we have to try and unpick it and then consider how we can support them to overcome that fear. But everyone has skills and strengths, absolutely every child, every adult. We need to find them, we need to use them. And we can't do that unless we can see them, unless we see the best. So value the people you lead and the pupils you teach, and make sure they see use their strength and value them. I did a TEDx talk back in 2019, which was about take a second look. Take a second look at yourself, take a second look at the people that you lead or the students that you teach. And I've given you the link there. It's just a 10-minute video, if that might be something that you're interested in. Whoops. And number 3 was something that I heard Dylan Williams say. He was quoting Robert Slavin, apparently, but it's always stuck with me, that if we are leading a team, we need to make sure that the team is working as a team and not just in a team. If the team isn't pulling together, if it's full of brilliant people, but they're not really supporting each other, they're not learning from each other, then they're not going to be so successful. It is about complementary skills and strengths. And as a leader, some of the people in your team will be better at some things than you are. And that is an opportunity. It's a gift. It's not something that you need to be daunted by or threatened by or defensive about. Diversity is important. We really need not just to appoint people who think like us, who look like us, whose experiences are the same as ours, because actually the team will be so much more strong if it's inclusive. And we need to delegate intelligently. And the most recent blog I wrote on the education site was about trying to get delegation right, in case that's something that would be helpful to you. The 4th one, I think there is joy in leadership. I found headship especially joyful. And it's really important that the people that you lead see that you model that it's positive, it's joyful. Deb's talked about lots of the challenges facing us. Absolutely. I'm not a Pollyanna. I'm not looking through rose-tinted spectacles. I understand all that. But I also think leadership is a privilege, and it can bring us huge satisfaction and rewards. People need to see that. They need to see what's possible. They need to see what matters most. Because if they only see the pressure and the stress and the worry and the exhaustion, then people won't step up to leadership in the future. And the students that we teach won't see leadership as appealing. So find the joy. I think that's really important. And the last thing I think I've learned was this. It's 14 years now since I stepped back from school leadership, and life beyond full-time work can also be incredibly rich and full. So when you get to that stage, don't fear it, embrace it, lean into it, make the most of it. You still have a lot to offer, still have purpose. And again, there is still joy. I read this book a few years ago and it really made an impression on me. It's by a married couple, Zoe and Mark Enser. She's an English specialist, he's a geographer. And whenever I'm doing any kind of professional development work, I always finish with this. Because your professional development isn't anything to do with what I've said tonight or what Deb said or what Diana said. It's about you, what you will do next. So think about what you've heard in the last couple of hours and think about what you're going to do with that information. So CPD isn't about the information. CPD is about the actions you take as a result of your reflections. If you want to read the CPD curriculum, Creating Conditions for Growth, that word again, this is a brilliant book. Please do keep in touch with me. I'm happy to share my email, my blog. I'm on LinkedIn and I use Twitter, X, a lot to connect with educators. If you have any questions, I'm very happy to take them. I'm happy for you to have a PDF version of these slides. Lizana has it already. I know you will have the recording, but I wish you well in your leadership and your learning. And I hope that tonight has just maybe sparked a few thoughts. So thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing your journey with us, but also taking us on a journey. And I know I have literally been back 30 years in the last 30 minutes. But I'm actually sat here with some very deep reflections that I will need to take time to process, because some of the questions that you've asked me are things, or asked us all, are things that I grapple with on pretty much a daily basis at times. And it is that piece of what is leadership. And I think we, when we enter into some of these types of roles, the roles that I'm in, we may have a view of what that is, and then there's a reality. But I think we also, and you talked about people who are thinking of applying for headship, there is also this thing about the speed. And some people, one of the things I often hear is, when I get there, when I'm there, when I'm doing that. And I say to people that actually, I don't want to deny them the opportunity to get there, but I don't actually think you ever get there. It's about actually enjoying, and you did talk about the joy, and I think that's absolutely crucial. It's about the joy of those moments. And reflecting on that piece about learning as you were talking, and I was thinking about, when do we actually know that we've learned? And I've written down here, it's the moment when we pause. And, you know, it's taking time in our day, in our week, in our year to say, I do need to pause, or what have I learned and what have we achieved? And sometimes I think we don't take enough time to do that. Now, we're also busy with everything that we need to do. But taking that time to pause and invest in our own professional development is important for our learning. So thank you very much. I do think we have had an incredible opportunity tonight to be able to listen to both Deb and Jill and have insights into the system from Deb, the landscape, and then what that means for the individual within that system, those structures and that landscape. I'm going to ask now if we've got any questions.
I was just reflecting, actually, I mean, what you were saying, Dr. Barry, and this is very true. A lot of the things that we see, I work actually in several schools, and the experience and the reflection that leaders actually go through it in order to solve problems and to change the school. Yeah.
What's your interest in leadership?
I am a literacy coach in my district, but I work actually in the central office. And well, I mean, by the name, I work in literacy, but a lot of times literacy instruction is not well implemented due to leadership decisions, the organization, for example, scheduling and so forth. And that's one of the things that we don't have a major control, but we need to show proof or persuade, right, the leader to actually notice that it's not being effective because of the organizational piece of in the school. And yeah, so we start actually advocating or sharing our expertise, let's say, and some of the leaders who are new, they do not know. So so then, I mean, when we see other schools, right, functioning or working and having results, we ended up actually getting that expertise and just sharing, right? Oh, in that school, this is what they were doing. And they're like, and then a light bulb goes on, right? And then they actually connect with another leader and so forth. Because when you are a leader in a school, sometimes you are in a bubble. And that's the only thing that you know, because you just work in that environment and you do not know what other schools are actually, what's going on in other schools.
Yeah, and I think your perspective actually as a district literary coach in a school in Houston in Texas is really fascinating. So I was there, as I said earlier on, so I was at Pennsylvania for AERA the other week, and I've got colleagues that I've worked quite closely with in Florida. And when you look at how the districts are divided up and the role that you're doing in working with those leaders in their kind of really well organized now, actually, principal development programs that we have and those sort of milestones that those districts are hitting and encouraged to hit, right? Whereas actually what we've got in an English context now is, yes, stuff that looks very similar to that in 1 or 2 multi-academy trusts, but actually we've got 2,500 multi-academy trusts and the government wants us to have 1,000. So we've got a whole load of rebrokering of small trusts going on in bigger trusts at the moment. So those developed pathways that you've got in not all American states, some states are better than others, and I know yours is one of the more organized ones from the work I've done in the US, but it is that, you know, understanding what leadership preparation and development looks like on the ground and how it works. And we've got, I don't know if you've heard, Emmy, but we've got a new interest or a renewed interest in oracy just kicking off in England. So we've just got a new commission that's just been launched into it. And so one of the conversations I was having the other week was around whether or not we were going to get literary coaches to do literacy coaching in an English context, because of course it would be yet another piece of policy borrowing along with, you know, our own version of charter schools and everything else that we've had, right? So yeah, really fascinating space to hear your insights from. Thank you.
Anika has now typed her question in the chat. So do you want us to know how people developed a leadership profile outside of traditional leadership roles within institutions? So outside of headship or outside of roles in HE?
So I could do that one because Jill's done through her very kind of traditional headship route. So Anika, I didn't really say this as part of my talk. I just put my kind of affiliations up on my slide at the beginning. But I worked in schools for 12 years. I worked in universities for 12 years. So like Jill, I've been a head of sixth form. I've done roles in program leader roles, run a couple of different master's programs. But when I'd been out just more than 10 years, as Jill knows, I looked at going back in because we'd set up a system, particularly in the English context that I live in, of specialist leaders of education, local leaders of education, national leaders of education. And there I was running master's programs in leadership. And I kept meeting people at academic conferences who didn't know what was happening on the ground. And because a lot of my friends teach, it's 30 years this year since I did my PGCE, I felt that I wanted to be more in touch really with what was happening. So I got the role of running what was the local teaching school, and then we've morphed that into a local education charity, which has become regional education charity. And I tend to work now with people who often started as teachers and have held leadership roles in various positions, but have either done the sort of more traditional journey through education doctorates and leadership roles in universities, or have done their academic qualifications, you know, like Jill was telling us to embrace the next step when you get to that point. And Jill was explaining how she'd done her EdD and the steps that she'd done since the doctorate. People who've set up on their own and done that. And Jill, you might want to come in there because that's what you've done, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are lots of ways in which people can lead, and it depends on what you're interested in, what you're passionate about. I mean, I know quite a few people who lead in all sorts of voluntary organisations.
Yeah.
And one really good route is to go into school governance, because actually that, if you know about education, you have a lot to bring to school governing bodies, because obviously they need people who understand education. And sometimes people go in and end up chairing education committees or becoming chairs of governors. So there are lots of ways you can lead, but it depends what you want to do and what you're interested in, really, and where you feel you have a contribution to make. Because leadership is about making a contribution, isn't it? It is about making a difference. So lots of opportunities, Anika, and it depends what it is you want to do and what particular enthusiasms and commitment you have to share, I think.
Chantal, that's right. Great, thank you. So asking whether or not we can talk about coaching, so how we access coaching. And I know people who do coaching certificates, for example, have to provide some coaching for free while they're training in their coaching, Chantal. So you can often put adverts on Twitter, if you're on Twitter or on LinkedIn, saying that you're looking for a leadership coach. So when a friend of mine qualified as an executive leadership coach, she had to do a certain number of hours and was helping support a couple of people like that. Come to Women Ed events if you're looking for roles in education. A lot of us choose to coach for free. Jill's obviously just offered to give you her email address. So, I mean, there are lots of us who can help and support with that, Chantal.
And Twitter is really useful here, because there are lots of people who offer coaching qualifications who talk about it on Twitter. So if you use Twitter or X, get in touch with me, and I can put you in touch with some. Hannah Wilson, for example, has got a huge range of diverse coaches who do really good work. So that's good. Did V have a question?
No, she's going to share a reflection with us.
Yeah, not a question, but I do have loads of questions, but I need to form them first. But I did want to share a reflection in terms of, leading through networking. So my whole journey, I think the growth in my leadership that I've seen is when I reached out to Deb and introduced me to Women Ed. And then I'm a mental health, I want to enhance mental fitness, and I just see it as an avenue. A lot of what you said, Jill, fits right into that, isn't it? Building capacity and relationships and resilience and communities and all of that. But then through that, Twitter, never been on it, but Jill, the networking that we did with Jill encouraging to get onto Twitter. So attending Women Ed unconferences and online events like this. And then, as you said, Jill, on the last conference about action, what are you going to do? So in 2022, you had said about getting onto social media. And if you're scared of it, then just like and repost. And just that for now, and follow influential people. So leadership through networking in that way, with what Deb was saying, and trying to make a contribution, being brave, I think is really important. The idea of courageous leadership, because recognizing the value in what you've learned and being brave enough to offer it out. So no, I just wanted to share that and thank you. Thank you for this opportunity as well.
been great to get to know you, V, and we wouldn't have done that had it not been for networks and Twitter and Women Ed.
Jill,
Brilliant.
yeah, V, it might be worth, because you'll have other people on the call tonight who are interested in it, and you've been through it for the first time quite recently, whereas Jill and I have obviously done it a bit further back. If you just wanted to explain to people what that process was in doing that first publication you've done, because I thought that was a really, because V is a middle leader in a school, so she's written a book. It's a small book, but it comes from a small book series, so it's a perfectly formed book, and it was a great process, wasn't it, that you went through?
Yeah, but that in itself, so I've got a little book it's on student mental health. I don't think I've got a copy in here to show you, but that was on the back of a conversation that I had with Deb about leadership. So during COVID, I was looking at behavior management in the classroom and just all the challenges, but looking at it from a psychological point of view as a teacher. And Deb suggested that I write it up, and we got a publication chapter in a book from that, and then out of that it build capacity. So that was leadership right there. Give me an opportunity, challenge, support, build capacity, showing me what I was able to contribute. And that gave me the confidence then to go on to do other things, like writing that. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Jill. Right, writing that little book, which then the networks and the leaders who I have, who I do look up to, have then read, commented, supported. So Jill, you did that. You read that little book for me. Thank you. And, shared it. And also give me that reassurance of what was good about it, and areas for development, with Deb as well. So it was a brilliant. And then from the chartered college is another thing, Deb, I noticed that you had it on your presentation.
Yeah,
but the chartered college, once you go to all of these different events, keep an open mind, network. But what Jill, you were saying, what is your next step? If you have one or two things that you can act on from that, because it was off the back of that chartered college event, Deb, that we were able to come up with this conference, where this was shared. So it was, it is exactly what you were saying in action.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the little book, that series that you've done recently, was an interesting kind of process for you, wasn't it? Working with the team and everything.
Yeah, and just reaching out with different practitioners from all around, different, from primary schools and secondary schools, and looking at how they enhance mental health.
We've got now from Anika in the chat. I'm just trying to read it. So been in education for 20 years now and in leadership now, but I felt that further progression has been challenging due to a lack of opportunities or minimal support in moving any further up, despite consistently positive reviews and feedback on how I lead. Have either of you faced this? And are there any stats on Muslim South Asian women in leadership in HE that can provide some confidence that this isn't because of who I am, as opposed to what I bring?
Yeah, I mean, I can't recommend, I mentioned it, didn't I? The Institute for Education and Social Equity. So, I mean, I'm one of Paul's founding fellows, and we set it up back in 2019 because, it's really important that everybody feels that they have space. And I think that a lot of people, Anika, feel just like you feel. And I supervise a lot of different people from all over the globe on the EdD program I work on at Liverpool. And some of my own students have been to Paul Miller's conferences and have said, wow, I wish I'd been to something like this years ago. And I say, that's brilliant, but actually nothing existed to my knowledge like that years ago. So it is about us making sure that we as allies support you, support people in your community who want to develop. And I think sadly, we are lacking those forums. They are not anywhere near as numerous on the ground as they should be. Just in terms of your own academic career trajectory, the HE Academy do lots of events. So they've just done a big EDI conference just last month. I mean, they put on specific events for specific groups of people. So I would say in terms of academic progression, HE fellowship, you know, have you got your senior fellowship? Are you considering doing your principal fellowship? If you haven't done it, Diana, I think you've done your principal fellowship. Yeah, I mean, it's about speaking to those people who line manage you, and you know, literally saying, look, somebody's recommended I do this, will you support me in helping me do this? So I often start with lots of people at the, you know, the early days of their academic journeys, because I'm an EdD supervisor. So I get people very early on EdD programs to look at the associate fellowship roles in HE, or if they're already teaching, to just look at the fellowship roles. Because as I said earlier on, it's about finding those spaces. So, you know, are you publishing your students' work, for example? That's why I was giving a shout out to that particular transformations journal. If you've got work from your masters that you've done because you're in HE, have you published it? So our Management in Education journal is an ideal space for that. So it is about just thinking about those organizations that you're working with, because the stats are, we've got all the stats and the stats are terrible. So we have 66 Black women professors across the whole of the UK. You know, they are numbers that we really need to improve. You know, we've just had Marlon come in to run BERA, so that's great. So BERA has its first Black president. You know, I've done lots of work with Paul Miller, who was made a Distinguished Service Award recipient at Belmas last summer. You know, there are lots of people who are doing brilliant work in that space, but we absolutely need more and more people in, because as I was saying earlier on, you know, you need to be seen in those roles in order to encourage other people in to do those roles. You know, this isn't magic, this is leadership. We can all have a go at doing it, but we need to be given the opportunity to try to do it and the support that we need in positions of doing it. I think some of the things that Jill's mentioned, like school governance, though, it's sometimes promotion can be about proving you've ticked those boxes. So, you know, are you a school governor, or if you're working on education programs, have you got some wider knowledge from elsewhere? You know, have you, you know, are you aware of what that tick sheet looks like? And I think having conversations, if you're at Wolverhampton, you've got Lizana, you know, talk to Lizana, people who've been through that journey, I think is really important.
I also think that going back to the point I made earlier about people think that you get there and they describe something and they see something of what somebody else is doing and they believe that it's a destination. I don't believe it's a destination, or if it is, I haven't got there yet. I think it's about who you are and finding your voice within where you are right now, and it's not about a role, it's actually about having a voice. What I'm grateful, and I haven't met you, Anika, but what I'm grateful is that you are you've made your voice tonight. You've been quite clear about what you're trying to achieve, and wanting to understand how others have succeeded, and what that might mean, and what you could follow and who you could learn from. And I think there are definitely connections that you can make that we've already had some typed in the chat there that are a starting point. But it is also about realizing that that journey is happening, and so sharing that. One of the things that's not been mentioned tonight is, I don't think anybody's mentioned it, is keeping a journal. And just to finish off, I'll share with you that I keep a journal, but I do this in the form of poetry, and I don't write it every day. I wrote a lot of poetry as a child and always wanted to have my writing as a child published. And somewhere in a cupboard, I've got lots of poems I wrote from the age of about 7 or 8. And then I went back to it when I was a teenager. It's back in about 2016, I went on a leadership course, and we were encouraged to keep a leadership journal. And I went away and I did lots of reading around it. And I read what I still refer to as a very wonderful book by Gilly Bolton, which is about being able to reflect on your own learning journey. And in one of those chapters in that book, she talks about writing poetry to help with your own leadership journey. And I started that then back in 2016 and kept my commitment to it. I've not yet published any of that. I've probably got enough for about 3 anthologies somewhere in there. But I wondered, I've just managed to find, well, I've been looking while we were listening tonight, it goes back to 13th of November 2019. So I'd been in that role, in this role now, from the July, and this was the journal entry for the November. And I'm just reading it from a big screen, so forgive me for looking away, but it's called Roller Coaster. There are loops and turns beyond measure, and no 2 days are the same, and the thrills don't all come at once. There's no rhythm that is consistent, and the speed of change is slow, but others know that you are on the ride. Some try to take a seat beside you. There's no safety belt, and there are moments when you are left hanging upside down, but expected to decide to do it all over again. This theme park ride is only for the brave. And I share that with you because as I was looking through, I was trying to feel how I could summarize that leadership journey that I think we all continue to be on. Deb and Jill, I don't know if you've got any final words for tonight. Perhaps, Deb, if I come to you first.
I think that's a lovely note to end on, Diana. I think that's a great note to end on.
And thank you so much, Diana. It's been a real pleasure to be part of it. Best wishes to Lizana. Thank you for asking me.
Thank you ever so much. Thanks, Jill.